I'm currently lead architect at Dealtrack, and I'm going to be talking to you about my journey from lead developer to architect. So the company I work for is called Dealtrack, and we provide a motor finance and insurance platform to car dealerships throughout the UK. We're part of a larger dealer group called the Auto Protect Group, and I've worked there just over 5 years now. I became an architect about a year ago, and previous to that I was the lead developer, and before that senior developer. So Dealtrack have a legacy product that's existed for about the last decade. So like many legacy platforms, it's led to a lot of technical debt and bugs over the years. So recently we've embarked on a complete rewrite of our platform. So basically we've largely started from scratch, as opposed to trying to rewrite what's already there, which is what we initially tried to do. So we basically looked at it as if we were a competitor to ourselves and tried to challenge our preconceptions about how we did things and the best way the systems could be designed. I've personally been responsible for all technical aspects of this rewrite project, and my day-to-day job basically involves writing and maintaining technical specifications, working with the team, and designing the optimal architecture for our systems. So our new tech stack basically leverages many services of the AWS platform, including API Gateway, Cognito, Kubernetes, DynamoDB, Lambda, Elasticsearch, and S3. We use a mix of graph database called Neo4j, along with DynamoDB for our storage layer. And we use a mixture of PHP, mostly, and Python for our backend application. The Python is basically more serverless interaction with Lambda. I'd like to go more towards the Lambdas because I think serverless is the future personally. We have a API-centric, event-driven architecture, and we employ domain-driven design principles such as CQRS and event sourcing. A lot of people like to use the term microservices, but I prefer appropriately sized services, and that's how we tend to divide up our infrastructure. So a little bit about me. I've been a developer for more than 15 years now. Started off as a web designer, originally using the likes of Director, if anyone remembers that, a product by Macromedia, and Flash, which was bought out by Adobe and is pretty much extinct now. I used those two along with HTML and JavaScript back in the days when you had to write multiple versions of the same JavaScript for different browsers. You may all remember the browser wars if you're that old, between Internet Explorer 3, 4, and what was Netscape Navigator, which became kind of Firefox. I taught myself PHP as I became interested with how to display information from a database on the front end. So I originally started off with Flash, designing actually e-learning content, and I wanted a way of integrating with the backend for providing a data source for that e-learning content. So Flash had a XML integration with PHP, and you could basically use that to connect to a database at the time, which was around MySQL 4 back in the day. So that's basically how I got started, and it gradually drew me more and more into back-end development. I've not looked back since. I became interested in programming since I got my first computer as a child, which was a Commodore 64. I used to spend hours and hours typing in games from magazines along with my dad, and I eventually started trying to write little games myself, especially when I got an Amiga. There was something called Amos, which allowed you to write games with it. It was like a games framework. So that's really what got me interested in programming. Over the years, I've been involved quite a bit in system administration with particularly Linux. I've done a stint as a DBA. So I've done database administration, particularly with MySQL and Postgres. And more recently, I've got into the world of DevOps. Some are influenced by the rise of Docker and the world of containers, which I'm a massive fan of. This has led me to learn more things about network design, security, and generally how all the pieces fit together outside the world of code. My communication skills were never my strong point in my early career. I would basically never say boo to a goose. So this is a key skill for an architect. So I forced myself to start doing public speaking. I first became a speaker at Leeds PHP meetups, and I'm now an organizer of PHP Leeds and also the PHP Yorkshire conference. I hope one day to be able to speak at one of the major PHP conferences, and basically the speakers at the conferences are like my inspiration. So on to architecture. You may be interested in the various types of architect. There's a software architect, which basically largely focuses on the technical component of a delivery and helps the business to make design choices from a technical perspective. It's critical that a software architect has a deep knowledge of the various relevant technologies for the stack that they're interested in and have the ability to do research and design and work out the optimal path and convey that to the rest of the team. A solutions architect basically has a lot more conversations with the business, so they're more kind of domain orientated, and they define how several systems will work together rather than one specific system. So for larger companies, you may have various different platforms, and a solutions architect would design solutions for the various platforms rather than specializing in one specific platform. An enterprise architect affects the entire organization, so the kind of like top level people, more like getting towards a CTO level, I guess. So they basically work across all projects and have a vision of how everything fits together from an enterprise point of view. An enterprise architect will have a broad technical vision and think a lot on the future strategy of the marketplace. They will not interact with the code, not that level of detail. They'll be much more focused on communicating the technical direction to the top level. So stakeholders of the business, directors, that kind of people. So personally, I'm a mix of a software and solutions architect. I do quite a lot of research and design, and when I'm armed with the options, I debate it with the business stakeholders and the technical team in order to determine the best solution, both from the business and from a technical perspective. I think it's really important to involve as many people as possible when trying to come up with the best solution, as every opinion matters. I document the architecture, massive documentation fanboy, which generally involves lots of diagrams and help in writing technical specifications with the lead developers. I also set the core standards for the project. So for example, we might use open API standards for our REST APIs. We might use domain-driven design approach for our code base, TDD, coding standards, that kind of thing I would define and set the standards for the developers to follow. I define the full technical stack and how everything fits together, including infrastructure, the application layer, compliance, security. So you might be wondering, what exactly is the difference between an architect and a developer? You'll generally find that you need to go into a much broader understanding of technology as an architect, So instead of doing a deep dive into a specific workings of a specific database or a programming language, you'll instead focus on getting an overview of all the possibilities. So I might try and gain an understanding of several different languages and several different databases, and then analyze the best fit for the project. So this is so you're able to make the best informed decision of which technology is the best fit for a particular client and project. You need to be armed with the facts. This involves lots and lots and lots and lots of reading and attending of meetups and conferences and so forth. And I recommend making a little time every day to learn something new or refresh something you think you already know. You'll also need to be able to develop a deep understanding of the business domain. This is critical. And be able to communicate effectively with the various areas of the business, such as sales, people, and finance, which to me, explaining things technically in a non-technical way is somewhat like speaking another language, and it's certainly taken a lot of adapting to. I think it's quite a skill in itself. Importantly, you'll be no longer able to focus on writing code specifically, except for when you need to do some R&D and maybe a proof of concept to hand over to the development team to do a better job of. It can be hard to let go initially. I found that really weird initially, just kind of not coding when I've been used to coding day in, day out. So you'll need to learn to trust the development team instead of thinking you can basically do something better yourself, and focus instead on communicating the optimal design and making sure it's implemented. The dev team also needs to develop trust in you, which for me was somewhat already earned as I've been a lead developer before. But if you come in as a new architect into a company, then it may take some effort for you to develop trust with your team. You should realize that now you own the architecture. If anything's incorrect, it can mean a great deal of work refactoring for the team. So there's much more focus on writing technical specifications and standards and creating the likes of entity relationship diagrams in order to effectively communicate everything to the team. So why did I become an architect in the first place? I started to grow an interest for the architectural side of things as I became more knowledgeable in various different aspects of system design. And I basically wanted to focus more on the big picture rather than specific implementation. Cat's having a sneezing fit. For the last 5 years, I've been mostly doing technical architecture with being a lead developer. So kind of mostly development with a bit of architecture, and I basically swap the balance. This is mostly due to working for a smaller company where people can wear multiple hats. So the larger the company is, the more people you would have and the more the roles would be split. I developed more of an interest in being able to influence the decisions being made at a business domain level. And I became more focused on how all the pieces fit together, as opposed to just working on one specific piece of the puzzle. My increasing experience in different areas of IT basically has enabled me to see the big picture. It's important to see how all the cogs fit together. And I think that's something you can only pick up with experience and a fair bit of learning over the years. Or an eidetic memory. As I mentioned earlier, I had to focus somewhat on my communication skills, which is one reason I'm here today. It's crucial to be able to communicate ideas to the business and communicate technical concepts in a non-technical way. I've always been really analytical, and I love doing research and learning. I love the learning aspect of the role. I'm often seen on evenings just reading random blogs and soaking in things on Twitter and watching various learning videos and so forth. I'm basically in my element diving into a new subject area and learning about it, which is a key skill for being an architect. So one day, I had a chat with my boss, and we decided it would be good for everyone, for me and the company, for me to move into a permanent architect role and to let someone else take up the lead developer position, as we're a small enough company to just have one lead developer in the team. This came at the time when we were about to start our new platform rewrite, and the architecture of this became my full focus. So, some tips on becoming an architect. It's essential to gain a strong understanding of how everything fits together. So you basically need to get an overview of operations, development, networking, infrastructure, security, all the pieces basically, and how they all fit together. You need to learn to let go. So basically you're now more a conductor than a musician. You need to learn to trust the team and to get everyone's input. The more I do my role as an architect, the more I realize it's essential, basically, to discuss issues with the team and to get everyone's input. Develop your communication skills and other soft skills. It's key to be able to work with everyone in the business rather than just the development team. Often developers kind of hide in the corner if they're more introverted. I certainly did in my early years. And basically you need to force yourself out of your comfort zone there and learn to engage with everyone else. You need to have a passion for learning and, more importantly, make time for it. You need to have a keen eye for detail, and in order to save costly, unnecessary refactoring, basically, being a perfectionist is nice. So double check, triple check your facts. Keep on top of the industry trends through your domain. So for me, that's the motor industry. And I try to keep an eye on blogs and articles, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. If suddenly it's hard to buy cars in person due to a coronavirus, for example, then it's reasonably likely that there's going to be a demand for car e-commerce websites. So dealers tend to sell in person, like to get people in to give them the hard sell on things, whereas now we basically switched a lot more to selling online remotely, and that's a major shake-up of the industry. So effectively, we've been focusing more on our API layer and working on strategies for how we can move with the times. And that's it from me, short and sweet. I'd love to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much for that. It's always good to get hear from someone else who's going through something similar, or what people are thinking of going through. Just keeping an eye on the chats and stuff like that to see if there's any Q&A coming through. Question from Dan: how are you going to avoid making the same mistakes?
It's a good question. I guess you learn from doing things incorrectly. So I would avoid making the same mistakes. Document everything. Work to specifications. If something doesn't work, wrong. If something doesn't work well one time, then basically learn from your mistake and adapt. Maybe you can analyze why you made the mistake and work out a better solution for the future.
Okay, I was interested that at the start you sort of said when you were going through and sort of almost redesigning everything, you sort of treated yourself as a competitor and made that comparison. What do you think that gave you, and how sort of did you handle that? I'd sort of not heard that before when sort of deciding to rebuild things.
Well, I guess Dealtrack in particular, we basically got into certain suboptimal patterns of system implementation, you could say. And a good example of this is basically over the years, we've implemented lots of little bespoke changes for various clients, and that's led to lots of feature flags and hacks and basically messing the system.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically wanted to look at the system with a fresh pair of eyes, not being biased by what we've done in the past. There's been various decisions in the past of how the architecture was created, and a lot of those were no longer relevant. For example, in the early days of Dealtrack, people used to have their database and server actually in the dealer premises. So this led to a multi-tenant client architecture type design where basically every client had their own separated database. And whilst there's pros and cons of that, it certainly added a lot more cons than pros, and we moved to a more kind of centralized solution for that. We challenged how we were storing the data, the access patterns. We went towards things like NoSQL and graph solutions because there's a massive amount of complexity with validation rules from our finance lenders, for example. Imagine every single finance institution you try and send your proposals to. They've all got a different set of rules of how they want to validate the data. So this led to a kind of graph representation of these rules. And it was more efficient to store it like that than in a traditional relational database. So being able to step back and look at everything as we'd not before allowed us to design a cleaner, kind of better architected solution.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Sounds like nice benefits of a greenfield project whilst having all the history and lessons to nicely bring through.
It was actually quite a challenge,
mm-hmm.
getting people in the business and the team to adapt to thinking not like what they thought before. So everyone's obviously used to how the system currently works, the internal admin pages, for example, how things link together, and getting people to think differently to that is actually quite a challenge.
Yeah.
You just kind of naturally gravitate to what you're used to. But eventually we got there, and I think we've got a much better product now that we've designed.
Cool. Dan's question, I can see a couple of others in chat, which I'll get to, sort of follows up of how are you going to prove the new platform does what the business needs? Are you deploying it in steps and getting people to use it early, or going for big deployments where you plan to turn the old system off soon afterwards?
So for proving features, we follow agile development. So we've got stories written, and we basically implement the stories and prove features have been implemented. As for rollout, basically we're still leveraging part of our old systems via the API layer. So we're not rewriting everything in one go. We're doing a large chunk of it and then the next chunk. So it's not like a big bang, everything all in one go. We've been demoing to clients, getting feedback and adapting based on that. And then we're basically rolling out to a few clients initially, seeing how they deal with the platform, and then migrating out to more clients. So it's not like every client in one go.
Mm-hmm.
Softly approach, I guess you'd call it.
Okay. Some of the other questions that come in, do you worry that you will lose your development skills to the point that they won't be available if you need them?
It was a concern. However, I've been trying hard to work on side projects. I've taken more of an interest in open source, and I've been wanting to contribute more to that for years. So I feel this has given me the opportunity to funnel any kind of latent development into open source projects. I started trying to create my own little things, like I'm currently working on something for building open API specifications using multiple files and combining into one, which you'll see appear soon. I guess it's an opinionated approach on working on API specifications, but it works for us. I'm always learning and reading articles on development, and the bits of R&D I do kind of keep me going. Okay, so it's not as in-depth as writing the whole system, but I do the starting point sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of got a bit of my fingers dipped in the water, as you would say, and I'm trying to keep things going. I'm actually trying to learn new languages now, and I've always been really quite biased towards PHP, and I feel the new perspective I've gotten working as an architect, I've found myself wanting to learn like Python and even C and Go, and just kind of get more of a general rounded view of programming languages rather than focusing on specific ones. This is obviously a long-term goal.
Yeah. And I think you might have touched on this. How did you make the transition from developing to not developing almost at all? Was it a clean cut, or was it done gradually as you worked more as an architect?
It was largely a clean cut. Because I've worked on the legacy systems for so long, I did do little bits of fixes in there and help people and so forth, which I still do a little bit, to be fair. But largely, I've entirely focused on the architecture side, sort of maybe a 95% architect, 5% developer kind of ratio. And that was quite a conscious decision to do that, because I can quite easily get drawn back into the coding side, and that would have distracted me somewhat from becoming a better architect, because that's been quite a learning path from my point of view. I'd no previous experience specifically as an architect, so I've been trying to learn how to be a better architect, and I can't do that if I'm still trying to be a developer. So I did try and force myself to not code too much.
Do the developers tell you off when you tell them how to code something, if you do?
I don't like to do that. I don't like to really tell people how to do things. I like to discuss the reasons why something would be a good solution, and hopefully people will come to the right realization. So effectively gather the facts and debate things, and the optimal path should be clear from that. If not, I've done a bad job of explaining it. I don't like to say, you know, you need to create a function here and you need to create an object there and these should link up. I think that's for the developers to do. I would rather guide someone in, we need to do test-driven development and we need to follow this principle and this design pattern here, for example.
To be an architect, do you think it's needed to go from all the steps of a new developer to a lead developer?
I guess it's useful from an experience point of view. I mean, when I was just thinking about my own experience, when I was like, I guess, junior to mid-level-ish, then I didn't really have enough understanding of the extra areas around. So how all systems fit together, for example, the networking side of things, load balancers, cloud architecture, that kind of stuff. So I guess it depends on your own learning path. But I think the key is understanding how all the pieces fit together. If you can get to that before becoming a senior developer, then fair enough. I guess you could always focus on learning the path of being an architect rather than becoming a guru programmer.
Other than communication, what's the most difficult thing you're finding in your new role? Is there anything that is easier than you expected?
Two questions there, I think.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Anything? Yeah. Most difficult, other than communication, and anything easier than you expected?
I guess it's maybe leading to communication, but at times I find I define quite clearly the specification of something that I want to be followed, and sometimes it's not followed, and I think that's probably from a lack of good communication in some areas which you learn from. So that's probably the main obstacle that I've encountered. It can be from not just a technical point of view, but selling the architecture of something to the various people in the business can be quite a challenge, because it's very easy, I think, as a developer to talk about things in technical depth, but explaining those concepts in a way that someone non-technical will understand is a lot more challenging, and I think that's something I've had to work on. Something that was easy.
Yeah,
it's a hard one to answer. I've always really liked writing documentation. I find that easy, to be honest. A lot of people don't like writing documentation, but I'm quite at home spending hours and hours writing open API specifications, for example, and creating architecture diagrams. I think because I was a designer in the early stages of my career, I'm quite at home using the likes of Glyphy and Draw.io to create elaborate diagrams of how all the various pieces fit together, which is really useful, I think, for people understanding things.
yeah, always nice to fire up Glyphy and start getting a diagram out.
Yeah, I've recently found that Draw.io is a lot cheaper than Glyphy.
Okay. Going one sort of a bit more specific to your sort of what you're doing, how do you feel about the open insurance initiative? Will that impact on your business?
Nice curveball. The open insurance initiative, I'm not familiar with that, to be honest. I don't delve too much into the insurance side at the moment. It's more the finance side. But it sounds interesting. I'll have to read up on that.
Great. Are there any more questions from anyone? Just pause. I can imagine someone frantically typing now or not.
I think I need to get a much dimmer light bulb in here. It's like
interrogation light from one side in time for all the questions. Well, thank you very much for that. That was yeah, really interesting, and got lots of nice questions coming afterwards. So thank you very much.